So we're broadcasting. Hello and welcome to LoveWorkLife Consultants 60-Minute Mentors. I hope everyone's happy and well, and if you can hear us, can you please drop a line in the chat room or in the question and answer box to make sure that we can you can hear us and we can obviously hear you as well. Paul, are you good? Have you had a good morning?
I'm really good, thanks, H. All excellent. The sun is shining and everything's cool. Everything's great. Thank you very much indeed.
So the sun is shining for you. Up here in the north, it was raining this morning when I got up, and it's very overcast and a bit chilly, to be fair. Okay. Hi, Nicola. Well, just to, I'd say, if people just confirm that they can hear us. Nicola's just said hello, which is hello to Nicola as well. But if you can just confirm that you can hear us, that'd be great.
Oh, yeah. Here we go.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody.
People can hear us.
Stirling. What's Stirling like today? Is it nice? All good.
Stuart's
bright and breezy.
Bright and breezy.
Hi, Fee. How are you?
In those hills, bright and breezy.
Bright and breezy.
People are still joining in or entering, so we'll just give it a couple of minutes before people start to come in, then we'll kick off. We've got a slightly different session today, just so you can sort of understand what we're doing. So in February, Paul and I were guest speakers at the Recruitment Expo down in London, and what the Expo is really good at doing is they're good at giving you an opportunity to speak. They tell you you've got an hour. What they actually mean is they've got 30 minutes, and therefore you've got to cut your presentation down hugely to fit it in into 30 minutes. And as you guys know, that Paul and I love to chat and love to talk, and so trying to get things into 30 minutes was quite hard. So we're going to do a presentation that we did. So some people may have seen this presentation, but we're going to add lots and lots of things to the presentation. We finished last week's webinar off talking about the question that we missed, which was asking Paul about what he did with Office Angels during times of downturn, etc. And Paul and I, when we came off the webinar, we thought we could expand the actual this week's webinar, and what we're doing is we're going to weave into the webinar everything that Paul and I have done through times of recession, as managing director of Office Angels, as a director at Computer People, etc., to give you ideas of what we've done to help businesses go through those periods of time and come out of the other end in a really positive way and taking market share. So as people start to come in, I will click in, okay, and now we'll get Paul to kick off. So Paul, why don't you kick off? Because I think the question is, tide and tide waits for no man.
Okay, so the thing that you guys will have all noticed is that there's two absolutely gorgeous photos of two young men there. That's Howard, as you probably realise, at the top, having just been sent off, I think, in a professional rugby match, which made national news because he looks like a complete and utter thug in that, obviously. And then there's, that's all right, H. And there's this very pretty boy down here looking like a sort of 70s pop star is me, believe it or not. And from what I can tell, I haven't got a single hair on my chest. But that's the pair of us. I was 21. I think you were a similar age, weren't you, Howard, at the time?
Yeah, 21, 22.
Okay, so that's us. Tide and tide wait for no man. And I think, we are now entering this incredible period of change. I mean, the level of change that we are now going through it literally is unprecedented. When we wrote this, of course, we had absolutely no concept that we were moving into this crazy period, this amazingly weird period of time. So I guess it was kind of prophetic in the sense that we could see the change coming, although we had no understanding of quite the level or pace of the change. But at this point, we were saying that the reality is, of course, that nothing stays the same forever, that change is really not an option. It just happens. Whether you embrace it or not, it's going to happen. So you really have an opportunity to either embrace it and go with it or be swept away with it. And I think what we were definitely saying at this point, and we're still very much endorsing this, is that given the level of unprecedented technological and political change, and we've almost all of us have forgotten that Brexit is still on the cards, and we will be moving towards quite conceivably a no deal by the end of the year. we're going to have to accept that. With all this change occurring, we have to embrace it. And certainly the conversations we've been having on these webinars and those that we've been having with our clients around the country has been about, look, don't wait for this. Don't get swept away with it. Get on the front foot, embrace technology, embrace the changes, and start to review your business models and start making adaptations so that you can take advantage of the opportunities that we believe will be coming around. Which may seem an odd thing to say considering we're talking recession, but some of the biggest, most globally famous businesses were all launched during depressions and recessions. And despite the fact that we're going to go through this economic downturn, we believe there are real opportunities for forward-thinking businesses to expand and develop their market share. So be an agent for change is what we were saying then, and it's most definitely what we're saying now. Howard, I think you probably want to cover off the next slide.
Yeah, I think that when I started to look at this, and we had our question last week, and then we started to talk about what we did at the expo, it sort of gives an idea of what's going on. And there are only 24 hours in a day, and how you manage your time is really important. But what was more important is where should leaders actually spend most of their time, because you can't afford to sort of spread yourself too thinly, nor can you become isolated. And I think what we've got to understand is that there is a massive amount of pressure about using our times wisely. And I think I always reverberates in my head is the Pink Floyd song, "Wasting Away the Moments That Make Up a Dull Day." Because if you start to waste away your time, then you're not going to be productive. But also you've got to think about what your staff are doing. So we need to think about what you do that makes you money. Therefore, you need to be do more of that. And I think everybody knows within their business, and I think going back to sort of 2008 and sort of 2002, you knew who your consultants that made you money. But to me, it was knowing the parts of your business that actually lost you money, knowing parts of your client processes that lost you money. And do you know which clients actually on the surface look good but are actually bad, and vice versa? And so really in 2008, one of my first missions was, when we went into recession, was to get hold of my 10 to 12 managers and my 14 to 15 team leaders in Computer People and Spring and get them to understand that. And I also wanted to know how I spent my time and what I was doing with my time. I want to know where I was most productive, because I want to know where I was most productive so I could have most focus on what was going on and what functionality I could give back to my business and back to my teams, where I was creating opportunities for other people and working from there. So we all talk about sacking non-productive clients, but we should be also talking about getting rid of non-productive time. So I started to measure where I was spending most of my time, and then started to look at the output from those individual time periods. And I thought it was results. Time equals results, but what's more important is the results. So I was actually focusing on the time that I spent to get the results and not the duration, where I flipped that and started to actually focus on the time that it took me to get the results. And therefore, if it was taking me a real long time to get the results, was that a really good piece of my time and good expenditure of my time, or could I be doing something a little bit more productive with my time? So I started to really sort of look at focus and what focus was doing, because in 2002, when I first came into CP, it was the dot-com boom and the big crash had started. My first management task was in CP was really sort of get people to divide their day into units so they could focus on the individual parts of the sale. And I think to ensure that no part of the sale is actually skipped during recession, because people were saying, oh, we don't really want to be doing that much BD. I want to cut corners because I need to be fast when I'm doing interview techniques and interview preparation, etc. So I started to compartmentalize my time and got my managers to start to divide their time down into these certain focuses each day. So I had a lens on the productivity that everyone was doing, which means that I had a lens on the results. I also worked out that I wanted to spend time with people that I could affect, and therefore I wanted to spend time with my top billers and my people in the business, and I wanted to spend time with them so they felt valued, and I could help bounce off them and they could help bounce off me, which then had that trickle effect down into the rest of the business. And I want to maximize my time to drive that time through from there. And I thought at that stage, and certainly in 2008 and in 2002, putting people first was the strategy that would benefit the business. I wanted to know how my people felt. I asked them constantly and genuinely how they felt. I wanted to understand their motivators. And in most cases, their motivators were not money, and they're not money still. I wanted to know what worried them. I wanted to know how I could help them become better versions of themselves. So I wanted to work on my circle of influence. And I got my managers to work on my circle of influence. And I think that's where we started to talk, Paul, about vision and how our circle of vision or our circle of influence helped our vision for the business further down the line.
Absolutely. So if you could put the first point on for me, Howard, there, that's great. So I think, look, there's a point here that everybody listening to this will really relate to. Anyone that's ever run a recruitment business will know that we all spend far too much time focusing on internal issues, politics and challenges. I mean, if you analyze the amount of time you spend dealing with staff issues, staff challenges, all the minutiae that goes into running your business, it's an inordinate amount of time. And I guess if I was putting some kind of percentage on it, I would think you're probably looking at 70% of your time internal gazing rather than externally gazing. And that really, we all know it. It's not like I'm going to be saying something to you guys that you don't know. We all know that's wrong. We all know that all the time we spend internally dealing with all the nonsense often that goes on is time that we could be spending talking to clients, talking to movers and shakers in our sectors, networking and so forth. We do spend an inordinate amount of time looking internally, which is a big mistake. It's sometimes unavoidable. These issues happen. We have to work on them, but I want to come back to that point. So the very best business people, the ones that really make it big time, are these people. They reverse that cycle. They actually develop a business that enables them to have 70% of their time looking outside of the business. And I think that if I think of my own career, particularly around my early days in Office Angels before I was the managing director, one of the jobs I most enjoyed doing was when I launched and developed the business development division and marketing as well, which I was also head of for a period of time. And I think back to that point, and obviously most of my time was spent externally. I was talking to clients. I was running around the country, meeting organizations, doing presentations, going to networking events. And not surprisingly, it was also one of the most enjoyable jobs I ever had. And we had enormously good results. Within 2-3 years, I think 2 years, that particular that particular division was responsible for something in the order of 20% of the turnover of the company, which was no small amount of money. So being in front of clients and candidates for all of us, we know is extremely important, not just for us, but for our people. How do you reverse the cycle? How do you get to a point where you can start looking out of the business around that curve as the graphic demonstrates? There's a question here you really want to be looking at. What is it you actually want from your business? I mean, I've never yet met a business owner that didn't tell me they want a hugely successful company. They want to build a business. They want to take on lots of people. They want to obviously generate escalating profits and turnover. Of course, we all want that. But is it really what you want? Is it really the focus of the business? Isn't it really the case that what we should be focused on is providing unbelievably good customer service to our candidates and clients? Because of course that generates the revenues, the turnover, the profits we're looking for. And chasing the money is, we all know, not necessarily the right tactic. And this is our opportunity, the one we're in right now. How do we ultimately provide a better level of service to our customers and candidates? Because the money, as I say, will come on from that. And there's a very important last point on this slide, and one that I think that you really need to think hard about. So we often talk about the fact that there are no such things as 360-degree recruiters anymore. In fact, we wonder whether they ever existed in the first instance. That in itself can apply to us. And what do we contribute to our business? Where do our strengths lie? What do we spend a lot of our time doing in a business? So for example, I can guarantee you that finance, i.e. if you like, doing accounts is not something that I particularly enjoy. And I wouldn't say it was one of my greatest talents. I can do it, but I spend quite a bit of time dealing with it. Is it good use of my time? Probably not. I know where my skills lie, and I should be spending most of my time in the areas of my strengths. And I think one of the things that you guys need to be thinking very hard about as we're getting into the new world of work is what your strengths are. Where can you make your largest and most powerful contribution towards the results of your business? Most of the business owners I work with would love to spend their time in front of clients, talking to clients, networking, schmoozing, influencing, all those things that got them to where they are in the first instance, but they end up embedding themselves in the minutiae of the business and spend precious little time doing the very things that have made them so successful. They're doing 30%, they're using 30% of their time in their areas of strength, and they're putting 70% of their time into areas that they're not necessarily interested in particularly or have strengths in. And that's one of the things you guys have got to be thinking very hard about as we come out of this particular situation.
I think to add to that, Paul, on vision front, we've got quite a lot on vision, is that, trust to me was the big key word. And I work with managers to ensure that we weren't feeling lonely or pressurized, because I think no person should be an island. And yes, we talked about results, but I spent more time about talking about them, how they felt, what we could do more together. One or two didn't like to open up, and they found it hard. And that sort of almost always told me that, when you're sort of in management meetings, they were the type of people that would always tell me everything was good and everything was going okay, when I'd look at their figures and quite obviously it wasn't. So it took a while for them to start to break down and understand that they could tell you things weren't going well without fear of retribution, because I was generally interested about them and getting them to sort of work really well. So I didn't talk a great deal about targets. I helped mentor them, I helped tutor them to sort of understand that if we get a real genuine people first situation, then we will start to prosper. As you said there, focusing on strengths became, you focus on your strengths to become outstanding, become a superpower of your strengths. And what I wanted to know was, who was the strongest people within my business? Not the strongest person from a sales perspective, but the strongest person within my business. I want to know the strongest people within my management structure that would help get me out of the situation that we were in. We were in recession, we had to move forward. So I spoke with staff, generally to get an understanding of the feeling in the offices. I want to understand what everyone felt. I want to know who was in this and who was up for the fight. I wanted to really know, as we said last week, who actually loved the company and would do anything for the business, rather than simply those who just liked the company and was happy taking a wage check home. So I got to know who was who. And what I started to do was then delegate tasks based on people's strengths and based on people's commitments on how they loved the company, because I knew if I delegated the most important tasks to those type of people, I would get far better results from those people. So I really looked at how I would utilize people's strengths and make them brilliant. I then started to look at the management team strengths, and I looked at the team leaders' strengths, and I looked at where we could be cohesive together, where we could add synergy together. And it asked lots of questions of people. And what it started to do, it started to sort of identify weaknesses in the business, but it also started to identify strengths in the business. Now, the plan was not to remove anybody from the business. The plan was to actually look at what I could help people with. So it was all about developing training and development plans for people, because I thought training was more important than actually it was ever before. And I thought creating a sharing, collaborate environment where the benchmarks were based on what the productivity was doing rather than the actual results, and I could measure productivity, would mean the results would come. So I didn't look to change the people, because I generally didn't think I could change people that much. What I looked to do was change how they trusted the business and make better decisions around the business. So it's not always the case of trust. It's a case of, do they trust their people within the business? Do they trust you? And sometimes some of your biggest billers aren't trusted by the business, and what sort of office atmosphere does that create? So you've got to start to think about the ripple effect that that has when people come into the business. So as Paul said, we need to stop looking at that time for 360 recruiters, because they didn't really exist. We had to start looking for people that had a vision of the business, of what they were doing, look at their key strengths and apply their key strengths to the business to ensure that we got the most out of the business. And that was all evolving around trust and how people trusted each other, because without trust, people wouldn't actually go that extra mile. And it's really important, I think, when we start to look at the marketplace now, clients are going to be coming to us because they trust us, not because they like us. And that's a very big differentiator when you start going out to clients again and selling to clients again properly. Do they trust what you're actually going to say to them? Do they trust that you're going to deliver? Do you have their best interests at heart? And if you have your people's best interests at heart, then they will portray that to your client base. And so it's working very hard with your clients to generate, with your staff, to generate the trust among the whole business and working from there.
So, I mean, this is an important point now. And, one of the things that we're all doing is reviewing our business models, considering how we're going to, if we need to, how we're going to change them, how we're going to develop them, enhance them, particularly around the areas of technology, embracing technology, and even looking to our pricing plans, our price points. And I think that what we have to do, and what we should have always done, is be proactive. But this time we need to be far more proactive and focus on the positives. And this is true also about mental health, because, we could all spend a lot of time getting pretty upset about the current situation, the damage that it's done to our businesses, to our incomes and so forth. But what's the point? We can't change it. It's happened. It's beyond our control. And this point about don't worry, focus on the things you can control is something I personally believe in a lot. I think as you get rather older and wiser, as I'd like to think I've become, I try to focus on the things I have a level of control over, to a greater or lesser extent, and I expend my energies in those areas because I can influence them, I can change them, I can improve them, and so forth. The things I have no control over, and goodness knows none of us have any control over this current situation, I just don't worry about it. I accept it. I don't like it particularly, but I don't lose any sleep over it because like everybody else on the planet, I have no control over it. So what's the point in worrying about any of it? Just focus on the things that you can do something about. And when you're doing something about those issues, then there's no need to worry, because the worry disappears simply because you're being proactive. It takes the stress away. And here's a thing. Remember the things we mostly fear almost never happen. Who could have predicted anything close to the situation we're in right now? If any one of us had uttered this on New Year's Eve and said, look, let me tell you what kind of year we're going to have in the next 12 months, everyone would have thought you needed to be sectioned. The truth is that things happen that we could never possibly imagine, and the things we mostly fear never happen, almost never happen. So it's the things that we never see coming that derail us. And the more I'm looking at these points that we wrote last year, the more interesting they become in relation to today's climate. I've said in my previous point, you've got to understand what your end game is. Now, I mean, again, that's very difficult because you're trying to predict something that is almost impossible to predict, but you have to have a vision. And as a leader, it's important that people know you have a vision for the future. If you cannot articulate what you see as the end game and how that will benefit you, your people particularly, then you are going to find it very, very difficult to keep people on board in your company. They absolutely need to see where the business is going and where it's going to end up. And you have to consistently articulate those viewpoints. You've got to look for the win-win situations, even in these difficult circumstances. And this is really one of the things we said as a prelude to this conversation. You really, really need to be showing inspirational leadership now, and most definitely when we start to return to whatever normal looks like at work, because people are very, very confused at the moment and very nervous about the security of their jobs and the security of their future. They need strong leadership from all of us. Now, the difficulty there is we have no more insight into what the world will look like in the next 2-3 years as anybody else. You know, we're not in a position of being able to see that. We're doing our best. We're gathering information, but our information is the same information that everybody else sees. However, we have to be strong. We have to be proactive. We have to be visionary, and we have to sweep people away with us in terms of where we're taking the business, and importantly, what it's going to mean for them. And you have to do that with firm belief, with absolute conviction, and with great enthusiasm. And if you can do that, even though internally you're really not sure, then you're very likely to take people along with you. Remember, big difference between leaders and managers. You know, leaders have followers, managers have staff, and we're talking about having followers during this, and indeed everything we talk about with our clients.
I think as we talked about that, Paul, we talked very heavily about what we've called the model team management. You know, Henry Ford had it right. He maximizes people's strengths and compartmentalized the workflow to ensure he optimized those strengths. You know, I think in 2008, my first thoughts when recession really hit was 360 recruiters. Is this an illogical role? You know, if it was logical, then why did so many recruiters or recruitment companies have such a high attrition rate? Is there a better way to manage? And we started to create teams that would knock down doors and have other teams that would actually fill the roles. So we focused on niches and we focused on clients where we knew we could get volume work from, whether that be permanent or contract work, and from there. And I think that part of that was then creating that effective team environment. So teams need to work cohesively across the business and complement each other's strengths. So there was no divide between the front office, the back office. It was a cohesive unit, and perm and contract worked really well together. They were cross-selling, they were upselling, and what we were making them go out to do was do joint visits. I was in meetings all day with key clients and with consultants constantly to making sure that we had everyone's strengths playing out into the market where we could maximize those strengths and return that into money. And it was all about creating that opportunity from there. So we built teams that complemented each other, and we built teams that complemented strengths. So if I knew somebody was better at closing and we had a client that had a really big project on, we'd use that person to close it. If I had somebody who was better at filling jobs, we'd use that person to fill the jobs. So in the vision, we talked a lot about synergies of teams and winning teams, and not only knowing your own strengths and recognizing them, but also doing something about them on a day-to-day basis. And what I did from that point of view, I created, and Paul was part of this sort of era because he was sort of where his office was based in Adecco. Was where the training division was, and I spent an awful lot of time at this time embedded in the training division, and I created what we called management briefcases at that stage, where we trained all the managers to deliver mini courses which we called training bites, and mandated those across the teams, that one lunchtime every week you would deliver a course to your teams. And after a while it became really obvious which managers were truly involved with their teams and loved to try to help their teams to develop, because they were actually out there delivering training constantly over lunchtimes, and you could see the success that that was having with their teams. We then started to look at how we then could counterbalance people's strengths and weaknesses to ensure that our high-performing team worked. So no one could do anything expertly with what we said. Everyone has to do certain things. So we stopped really looking for that genius recruiter. We stopped looking for that expert. We looked for the practical and the situational awareness of what was going on. And what that was about, looking at the strategy and tactics of the business, where we rose the strategy and tactics to the top of the business plan and said, right, who understands them and who can deliver them? And we sat that communication plan out there to ensure that the people that were delivering the tactics and setting the strategy were actually in conjunction with each other and communicating properly. And we looked at the current teams and we said, right, what strengths are missing? And we started to go out to recruit into the marketplace. So in 2008, we took an opportunity to recruit in the marketplace and take market share from other agencies by recruiting people in to do that. So we didn't let our weakness affect us. We focused on our strengths. And by focusing on our strengths, we became more behavioral aware of what people actually did within the business. So as soon as we got that understanding, I think what we did, we understood what our clients felt about recruiters on a day-to-day basis. And that was a real big game changer for us. We understood how our clients felt about our business. Did they trust us? Did they trust our staff? Did they trust us to deliver? And therefore, we started to change the way that we focused on our clients. And that goes back to Paul's earlier point, all about service. We started to provide a far more in-depth service to our clients. And therefore, we had to provide a far more in-depth from a management team service to our people, because it was our people that were going to put that service back to our clients. So we had to be ourselves, and we had to really look to that. And it was all about educating ourselves constantly. I would read loads and loads of books at this time. And in fact, I'd still read loads and loads of books about helping me understand certain parts of the human nature, how it worked, understanding certain parts of management and moving it on constantly. I always thought what I didn't know boiled down to one thing. It boiled down to it stopped me moving forward. So if I could find things that could make me move forward, then I wanted to understand that, because it would help me understand myself better. So knowledge was really important, and I expanded that knowledge. And what I started to do was train that knowledge back into my managers. And what I was trying to create was entrepreneurs within the business, people that would do things differently, but take a risk where they had to take a risk. And I think that was a really sort of big game changer. We took a risk. We moved away from looking at targets to looking at behaviors, and looking at how those behaviors manifest themselves down our client and candidate line. And then we addressed those accordingly to really change the way business saw us from the outside world.
So everybody's heard of this, the 80-20 principle, Pareto's law. I think the very best leaders concentrate on the few areas that produce outstanding and superior results. It is that 80-20 principle. So if you look at the tasks that we all have, and our industry is very much based upon, in a sense, being reactive. We wait for our clients to give us opportunities, and then we turn on the afterburners and we try and find the right candidates and get the details over quickly. It's all rush, fast. And all of that is going on consistently and constantly within every recruitment business. A lot of the effort we put in, as you're well aware, comes to nothing. When you review the volume of opportunities that you receive relative to the amount of successful placements, it's always, and always has been, right back to the 70s when I started, a small percentage of what we work on. That's something we need to change as we go forward. From your point of view, and coming back to my earlier point about concentrating on your own strengths, and indeed, as Howard's been saying, getting your staff to concentrate on their strengths, it's important that you focus on the areas that will definitely provide you and your business with outstanding and superior results. And that, I think, comes down, and it's difficult sometimes, but really focusing and getting a single task done properly before moving on to the next task. And I think most of us are guilty of desperately trying to spin a lot of plates at the same time and spread ourselves thinly across a whole range of tasks, when in actual fact, when you actually focus on doing one thing, get it done properly, ultimately it's much more effective. And from our point of view as managers, as leaders, prioritizing the strategically important situations, not the most urgent, is where we have to spend our time perhaps most effectively. And it's where we always fall down. We end up doing things that we think are very urgent, but a lot of those urgent things literally come to nothing. And the strategic issues, the issue of being able to see what's coming round the curve, round the bend, being able to guide your business to the point of the vision that you've been describing to your people, is really the most important thing you can be doing. A lot of this then turns to, who do you delegate to in your business? And one of the things that I think, particularly with smaller businesses, that we suffer from is a lack of succession planning, that development of people who can, as Howard's been talking, can be trusted, who can take on other tasks, who can actually be prepared, who you are prepared to allow to make mistakes, to get things wrong, because we do too, but you have to, if you're going to be focusing on the strategies and the vision of your business, stop doing certain things. That means delegating to other people in your organization. And there's a question I like to ask people when I work with them. Oh, Howard, you've lost me there.
All right.
And that question is, if we didn't already do it, would we do it today? And this is a vital question to be asking now before we get back into the workplace. Look back at everything you do. What are the things genuinely we should absolutely stop doing? And what are the things that we should start doing more of, or even introduce into the business? Because we all do a lot of things in our businesses, as our people do, that generate virtually nothing in relation to the value that we can add to the company, or indeed develop revenues and profits. What do you want to stop doing? If you were inventing your business today, from day one, it didn't exist prior to today, and you were launching it tomorrow, what would you do that's different from what you've been doing in the past? Because now's the time to be asking those questions of you and your people. Now's the time to be bold and make the changes. So when we get back, your business starts to look and act in a different way, in a more enhanced way, focused on providing outstanding customer service.
I think Pareto law has played a massive part in most people's management, lifestyle. And I think what I sort of took from Pareto was very interesting, that I started to investigate my 20%. Because if 80% of my business was coming from 20%, I wanted to know what my Pareto law of that 20% was. And once I found that, then I started to really look at what each office was doing. And I looked at the heartbeat of each office. And what I started to do was delegate results based on strengths rather than delegate tasks. Win this business, create this business, etc. And what I knew, that once I got to the heart of my business, I knew what was really making my business tick, then I could really drive it from there. So I personally made a point of knowing everything. Before I went to an office, I studied the results and the performance so I could talk to my teams with confidence. I worked with their managers, finding out what areas I could help them in. I made a point of talking to all my staff in the first 30 minutes of walking into an office and having a personal comment with each one to make them feel cared for. So I think as we start to return to work, and there'll be still social distancing on, still speaking to your staff on a daily basis, finding out what they're doing and having that little comment that's just personal to them starts to bring them closer to the business. And I think it's important that we really do that. So getting individuals, or giving individual tasks and making it personal to them, is really important. And I think that's the thing that we start to look at, is when you start to come out of recession and we start to really go, giving people personal credit and personal tasks really engenders them to the business and makes them move forward. And I think the other thing that during this period of time is that constantly regrouping. And I've put down here 3 times a day. But what I used to do from a constant regroup point of view would be, I would talk to people in the morning, have a quick check-in at lunchtime, and talk to people at the evening, about what they were doing. But during the day, then I'd be interspersing my skill set and finding out what people were working on, what they weren't working on, how I could help them, and working from there. And it all based around what the core skills were. And if I could then start to train the core basics into people, so we never missed anything from a recruitment point of view, we started to get better results because we weren't cutting corners. So it was interesting, sort of delegating based on people's strengths, but knowing what our real core strength was, what our 20% of our 20% was, became a real sort of mantra of driving into the business from a management perspective, because then the consultants could start to work on what their core skills truly were. And it's the core skills that make the money. And that's what we've developed really, throughout any sort of recession, to help accelerate the business away. And that was all about making effective decisions, Paul.
So if you could click on the next one for me, Howard. I think you guys can probably hear my front door going. This is the joy of working from home, I'm afraid. So I don't know who that is. No doubt it's Amazon. Anyway, one of the things that I think is extraordinarily important, and I would say, I'm sure you'll agree with me, if you think of your own skill sets And the thing that really makes the difference when you are leading a company, the thing that jumps out for me is communication skills. The very reason that we are in recruitment and that we've been successful in recruitment is entirely based upon this issue of clear communication, not only with our clients and candidates, but obviously clearly within our with our own people. And you as leaders have to have this opportunity, as Howard's been talking about, to communicate consistently with your people. That requires, from your perspective, very clear thinking. And I think we've got this chance now to be stopping and thinking around how we're going to redevelop our businesses, how we're going to be moving forward. And I've already said, if you can't think that through thoroughly and clearly in your own minds, nobody else around you is likely to, in terms of your own people. When we talk with our guys, there need to be clear boundaries. I think one of the reasons my old business, Office Angels, was so successful was that we had this enormous level of communication consistently going on between the regional managers, the area managers, the branch managers, the staff, the consultants in the office, me and my directors. There was just this constant level of communication around a whole range of channels. And I was genuinely, and I mean genuinely, interested in what my people had to say about the business, because they were closer to my clients and candidates than I was. So I was always very keen to seek and encourage others to voice their opinions. You know, none of us have a franchise on brilliant ideas. Occasionally we have great ideas, and a lot of our ideas are a bit flaky, but they can be developed with the inclusion and involvement of our people. And many of the brilliant ideas that were generated amazing levels of revenue for my old business came not from me or from the people that work closely with me, but from the people who were very much at the sharp end and talking to those clients and candidates. But when you have these ideas, you have to go and research and test the reality, because, you know, we all sit there thinking this is brilliant, we're going to make lots of money out of it. But actually, you haven't spoken to the target audience. Go and talk to candidates, figure out what they think of your ideas. Go and talk to clients, particularly the people you're closest to. Test out your ideas with them, get their feedback. We can have brilliant ideas, but, you know, it's no point in having these great ideas if they're not going to work with the target audiences that they're designed to impact and affect. I do think this is important. I don't personally enjoy sitting in meetings with people, particularly if you're the boss, to use that expression, when people around you just nod their heads in agreement. That's really not what you want at all. You do want people to challenge views, to challenge ideas, to have different ideas, different views. And that is absolutely the dynamic we all want within our businesses, because it creates stronger outcomes. What you don't want, of course, is anybody becoming unreasonable or unpleasant or just essentially ignorant. But I think there is a balance, and as a leader, you want to encourage that open conversation, particularly now before we get out there again and start trading for whatever normal is going to look like. And this point about never think of it as your way or the highway is absolutely important. You can't be a dictator. You need people to be joining you on the journey, and they will do that if they believe they're being listened to, if they believe their ideas are embraced, if they believe that what's going on in the business is open and transparent and they're involved in the direction of the company. Those things are extraordinarily important. And I've already said this, let's just not waste any energy or time worrying or focusing on things that may never happen. Just focus on the things you can control. Focus on the areas that are going to make a difference to your target audience. Of course, none of us know everything. In fact, most of us know a large amount of a very small percentage of the world's knowledge. There's a huge amount none of us know about. So again, important to be constantly talking to your team, constantly talking to people around you, your clients, your candidates, constantly looking to learn, as Howard said, reading and being aware of what's going on in your sectors. You do need to be an expert. If you're going to be a consultant by definition means being a teacher. It means being able to impart knowledge and wisdom to others. So it's absolutely important, particularly as a leader, you're constantly filling your mind with information that's out there. And listen to others, particularly as I've already told you, clients and candidates and people like me and Howard, people that are mentors who have been there and bought a few t-shirts and can pass on some great experiences and knowledge to you. Importantly, at the end of all of this, it's you have to make the decision. Try and be as informed as you can be. But there is a point to make here. You will never know for 100% certainty that the decision you're taking, the direction you're going in, is the right one. You will never know that. There is a level of risk in running a business which you all understand. But what we try to do is minimize the risk and increase the chances of success.
I think on that, Paul, the big thing that I've taken from that is the art of communication of whatever decision you take is really important. And sort of comment on a couple of things there. A lot of people that I met who were managing at the time didn't listen to learn. They listened so they could speak. And I think that was really something that I worked really hard on trying to sort of change, that you'd listen to what people actually had to say. And therefore, if you did that, you could take comment on board. And I sometimes think if you're taking comment on board, it's really important that you listen to what people truly have to say to you, so you can understand the difference between listening and learning, because that way you can start to be a bit of a visionary. And I always think goals are no secret, but communicating them clearly is a real fine art. And everybody has that goal setting sort of conversation with people, etc. But during a recession and during hard times, it's not just about the goal. It's about constantly communicating how people feel about the goal. And so digitally, we can now communicate in so many different ways, but we can never forget that human touch will always be our biggest skill set. And if we use our human touch properly when communicating, we can get so much more. And that might be just a simple word in someone's ear. It might be a simple email to somebody, something that actually touches that person deeply, that makes them want to do more for you as a business owner and as a leader. But it's making sure that that communication is constant and consistent right across the piece. And therefore, when I was communicating, I was always looking at my EQ and my central perception, and I always trust my instinct. I always thought if something wasn't right, then I had to really find out what that was. And I really wanted to discover what was wrong. I think too many times as managers, we maybe delegate something to somebody, or we give someone an instruction, and as they walk out the room, we're almost thinking, I don't think they understood that. I don't think they're actually going to go away and deliver that. And yet we never go after them, bring them back in and recheck and reconfirm their understanding. So I think we've got to understand that if we give an instruction, or we give a piece of communication out there, and if you feel people don't understand it, then that is your issue. That you've got to look in the mirror and change that and work from there. So I started to delegate my communication up and down the line constantly. And by delegating up and down the line constantly, I started to understand who was delegating properly and who was communicating to their teams. So I could start to see where the block was happening and what was going on within those blockers. So I started to really sort of drive that properly into my business. So quite often, I'd step out of my business, find the newest person in one of my teams, whichever office they were in, and I'd ring them or speak to them if I was there and ask them what they understood of the communications that have just gone out. And if they didn't understand the communication, then I took it on my part that I had to go back and work with the manager and check how the communication was being delivered, because if they didn't understand it, then there's a problem. And I wanted to make sure that we were all in the same boat together. So checking for understanding was really important. What I didn't want is 10 people in an office all in a separate boat. I wanted one boat, 10 people in it, all people pulling in the same direction. Because if you communicate properly to your people, it will create purpose and drive. And communication is actions, words, and continuity. So it's continuity constantly all the way through a process. And if you communicate success sincerely back into your team, then all of a sudden you start to create that environment where trust is right at the core of it, and people genuinely will bend over backwards for you. And that, when we start to come to recession and we start to come out of recession, is what will carry your business forward, and it will also what make other people sink if they have no trust within their business.
So this is I quite like this slide. It's be proud but never satisfied, and I think that's exactly where we are today. I mean, be proud of yourselves, be proud of the business, but never be entirely satisfied with what you've created. and look for something new to learn every day. And there's never been a better time to do that than right now. You know, we've had this pause button on business, on life in general. What an opportunity to just take a look at how we've been behaving, how we've been living, not only from a business point of view, but also from a personal, social point of view. I'd like to think that we all feel this way. Anybody, I believe, that's successful is always doing this, that there's a level of self-criticism. You've got to be careful with self-criticism, not to beat yourself up too much, because we're never perfect. We make mistakes, but it's important to learn from them. But it's also important to constantly analyze your own performance as managers, as leaders. And that means also driving your colleagues' performance. So on a daily basis, always analyzing, how did I do? What could I do better? How did the people around me perform? How can we learn from these things? Seek to improve your services is not about what we think our clients and candidates need or want. It's really about trying to figure out, by asking them what they think and what they would like. Now, there is just a slight caveat to this, because I think we talked about Henry Ford a moment ago, and Henry Ford, I believe, said that if he'd gone out and asked people what they were looking for at that time, they would have said faster moving horse-drawn carriages. He had the courage to go and start to build cars. I think certainly you want to be going out and talking to clients and candidates, but in the end, it comes down to your vision, your view of what the world of recruitment should look like, generated from your business. At the moment, there are precious little wins for anybody in recruitment, or indeed any other industry sector. So right now, and particularly as we go forward, as we come out of this, even the smallest wins need some celebrating. Things that in a year's time won't even get a mention, you need to jump all over and congratulate your guys about, because their morale and their feeling of self-worth is going to be very important. You need to be very mindful of that as we go forward. There's a Howard comment here. Winner starts to lose when winners stop working hard. This is a Howard comment for sure. And I love this comment. It's a very good one. So above all else, and you know this, we have to work extremely hard. You can be very clever, but you have to put the hard yards in. Successful formulas today, no guarantee of success tomorrow. We wrote that last year. Boy, is that a prophetic statement. So things that worked pre-COVID may work post-COVID, but may well be less potent, less powerful. So review everything you're doing, consider how you improve them, start introducing and enhancing the services that you're going to be providing as we come out. Everyone knows this point. You know, our business for the last 40 odd years I've been in it always comes down to 4 or 5 metrics, the 4 or 5 KPIs, the ratios, all those things that consultants generally dislike, but we know are really important. You can only manage effectively what you can monitor. And if we're going to be managing people, particularly when they're working from home, as they are at the moment, then being able to identify those target numbers, and there's not 10, 20, 30 of them, there are generally 4 or 5 key numbers, and being able to analyze those on a daily basis several times during every day will be the key to managing people effectively. And lastly, just this previous point, be proud enough to seek advice. I do constantly. I think I know Howard does. And one of the things that you will all understand, and you'll all agree with me, is that the older you get, the more experienced you get, the more you realize how little you know. And I think it's absolutely critical to be constantly leaning into people who you believe know more than you, so you don't have to learn by making mistakes. Learn from others and learn from people that you can genuinely trust.
I think what that sort of boils down to, Paul, is what we wrote here was, in youth we learn, in age we understand. And in 92, when I came into recruitment, 10.5% of the working population was unemployed. So what a great time to start recruitment. You know, very few people was recruiting. You know, I worked in an office where there was no CRM. So every time I spoke to a client, one of the senior consultants would shout across the room, "That's my client, get rid of him, stop calling that client." And they made it almost impossible for me to succeed. I had a manager actually who was really, really good, but I had a team leader who was very self-centered. Everything was for her, everything that she wanted for her. And what I ended up doing was creating my own niche, and working really hard. She laughed at that niche and said, well, that niche is never going to go anywhere. And when I started passing her sales figures, she got really annoyed by that and started taking clients off me, and I started building again. But what it sort of showed me was that I didn't really understand what management was about, but I understood what poor management was about. And when I sort of moved into management, I started to work on the things that were opposite from there. And I think in my youth, I learned so much about poor management, and my understanding of management has now started to come as I've got a bit more sort of skin in the game. I've become a little bit more worldly wise, etc. And I think experience inspiring success is all about learning from the people who have experienced what we have gone through, and how we can then go through it again and learn from those new things. So 2002, the dot-com boom, 2008, it was all about people first. And if we grew our teams properly based on our people's strengths, then we started to prosper. So I need to make sure that everyone was on that same page and doing those same things. So that is what we discussed, wasn't it, Paul? And that's what we looked at. That's what we presented to people back in February.
I think January, February, yeah.
January, February. So they're things. So if you've got questions, please start throwing questions to us. Fiona's asked a question, Paul, instantly, which was, what are the ultimate 4 or 5 KPIs?
Okay, well, I mean, Fiona already knows the answer to that, but I will answer it as best I can. Depends on your business to some extent, I think. But I would add that I think that, I'm always going to say, as guru, she says, funny. I would always say that in the end, it comes down to contact. One of the things that generated enormous revenues for my old business was the amount of client meetings that we attended. Now, I mean, we now are in this phase where we use platforms like this to meet, and we're going to need video platforms to consistently meet clients, because it's going to be rather difficult to go out and start meeting people face to face in the near future. This will become an embedded part of how we meet people, how we take job roles. For me, one of the big KPIs, because I've always believed that people buy people in our industry, is how often you are physically, or at least virtually, in front of clients and candidates. And I think one of the great KPIs is definitely to do with that. How often, how many meetings we're conducting, whether they're with existing, lapsed or new clients, and indeed how many conversations and meetings we're having with candidates. That's a massive KPI for me. I knew that when we were out hitting our numbers in terms of client meetings, that ultimately the roles would come through, the vacancies would come through, in my day, the temp assignments would come through. They all emanated from the level of personal contact we had with our clients and our deep understanding of their requirements, which led to us getting retained and exclusive opportunities. And we've lost our way as an industry on that point over the last 10 years, I think, because we've become overly reliant on emailing and speaking to clients via a keyboard. We've got to get back to using the force of our personalities, the force of our influencing skills to generate trusted advisor positioning with our clients. So I think it's extremely important. I also think that obviously the standard KPIs are clearly always going to be a part of this. So how many roles we're taking, how many interviews we're arranging, and so forth, the fairly basic stuff. I mean, we can reinvent recruitment if we want to, but it'll always come back to those core KPIs. And in the end, being on the phone, being in front of clients is always going to be the key point. How do we generate relationships, develop trust to give us the opportunities to make money? Hang on, what Alex is saying here, still try to work to that visit KPI, Paul. 5 a week to, yeah, there you go. So Alex, hi Alex, worked for me back in the day. And if I'm right, Alex, you worked in our Peterborough Office Angels branch. And here he is validating that point, even to this day. Try and be out 5 times a week. Well, now we have these platforms. Frankly, if I'd had this platform back in my Office Angels days, Alex, I'd have been telling you to do about 25 of these a week. So I think we've got an opportunity to actually really ramp up the amount of client contacts and indeed candidate contacts we have now. And these days, what's the excuse? The excuse might have been that we didn't have the time to get in a car and travel. How long does it take now to connect to somebody on Zoom or go webinar or Skype? It's an instant. So we don't have excuses, neither should we want them. When we get back to work, and in fact, right now, we need to be contacting and communicating with people to a very high degree going forward.
We've got some other questions coming through. Jeremy's asked a question here about, hi chaps, what are some of the mistakes that you've made and would advise to avoid with regarding people management? You know, I think we could write a book on the mistakes that we've made and then a bigger book on the mistakes we haven't made. But I think, you know, some of the mistakes that are making is thinking that everybody understands what you are asking them to do. I think that is one of the mistakes that I sort of learned very early on from a manager, that, you know, you can say, you know, ABC and other people will take that in a completely different way. And so you've got to check constantly that people understand what is expected of them and they deliver that. The other side of that is, don't always sort of underestimate your presence as a manager. I think a lot of managers think they walk into a room and everything is rosy. I think you've got to understand what your ripple effect is when you walk into a room, because it's really important. And more important, what's that effect when you walk out of the room? As you walk out of the room and people go, oh, thank God he's gone. Yeah, what? Yeah, God, he's you know, whatever it be. You know, you want people to want to be engaging. So I think as a manager, don't be afraid to engage with people on a personal level, on a one-to-one level, on a minute level, because that engenders trust. You know, if you show interest in them, they will show interest in you. And I think the biggest thing from a management point of view is it's all about the communication. Doesn't matter who you're communicating to, treat them with the respect that as a human being deserves, not as a salesperson deserves and often gets from their managers. Treat them as a human being, because something may be going wrong that can be cured that you haven't seen because you haven't taken the time to notice it.
Jermaine, I'll just add one thing to this point. And as Howard says, you know, after all these years, of course, we've made a lot of mistakes. First point I'd make is I don't think very hard about mistakes, because I don't see them as mistakes. And I have a struggle in understanding success and failure anyway as a concept, because things have to go wrong in order to generate success. You can't have success. You have to learn from mistakes in order to achieve success. And of course, in recruitment, as we've already said, you know, for every X number of interviews we arrange, only a small percentage by virtue of arranging them become successful. So you know, we know that there's a constant flow of things that don't necessarily work that create the success. So after a while, when you're in the industry for some period of time, this line between success and failure becomes rather vague. And for me, they feel like an intertwining strands of rope. You can't have one without the other. And I think that leads me to just the point I'd make to you about where I feel perhaps I'd have changed things if I could have done. And that would be that I think in my early years, I think looking back, I wish I'd had more confidence in myself to make decisions, to follow through on those decisions, because I think I could have been more successful rather quicker. These days, I trust my instincts, I trust my experience, and I'm prepared to, you know, stick my chin out and have a go, because I don't worry about failing. That's just not a concept that bothers me. I think in order to be successful, you've got to go for it. And that will mean getting things wrong. It will mean making mistakes. It will mean not always succeeding. But it's through that energy, through that courage, that you get where you want to go. Holding back and procrastinating is simply not, they're not qualities that people will follow. There's another point, very quickly, and I think we're running out of time, unfortunately. There's a question here. I just want to raise this. It says, going back to what Howard said about focus on your strengths and develop them, is there a school of thought that you should let your strengths flourish but improve your weaknesses? So I haven't answered that. Sorry, Howard. I'll just very quickly. I think absolutely concentrate on your strengths, put more energy into developing your strengths so you become brilliant in those areas, recognize your weaknesses, but also recognize that even if you put energy into your weaknesses, at best you'll be average in those areas. You'll never be brilliant at them. So put most, if not all of your energies into your areas of strength. Sorry, Howard.
I think to add to that question, or answer that question, is you look at any elite person any discipline that they do, whether it be sport, sales, etc. Okay, and let's take it's Kaz. He's a bit of a golfer. Okay, so Rory McIlroy will spend more time practicing what he's absolutely brilliant at. He will practice that day in, day out, and that 10,000 hours of practice. That it's what he's good at, is what he practices at. Yes, he will spend some time working on his weaknesses if his weaknesses start to really sort of eat into his game. But it's what he does well that makes him really good. So he practices what he does well constantly. And I think this is where recruitment sometimes goes wrong. We do a 2-week training course or a 3-week induction course, whatever it be, a 2-day induction course. Then we throw people on the phones and hope they survive, rather than training and training and training and training. It's, you're really good at this, but you're poor at this. So let me send you a course on what you're poor at. And as Paul said, you're only going to be the average at what you're poor at. So train and constantly develop what you're really good at and manage what you're weak at is really important. And I think there's a big difference in where you do when you look at those type of things. If you carry on working on your weaknesses, then guess what? Your strengths become weaker because you're not focusing on your strengths. So keep working on your strengths every single day. Stuart's asked about technology as part of the recovery. Stuart, I could talk for hours and hours and hours on technology and recovery. There are certain technologies I think that are key, and there's certain things. If you've got a CRM that you cannot get good data from, and you're unable to procure data from that system, then I would look to change your CRM. That's the first thing that I'd look at. If you can't get that data, you've got to try work it manually and work how you can get that data, and then look at technology that would advance your business. There's so much technology out there that, you know, we could say do this, do that, okay, and it might be wrong for your business. So if you want to have a conversation on that privately, I'm happy to do that. But, you know, really, KPIs and measuring your business is really important, and getting it out of your CRM. So if your CRM can't even do that, you've got to really question whether your CRM is really fit for purpose for your business.
Sadly, Howard, I think we're running out of time, unfortunately. So I think we're going to have to close in just a second. Thank you guys for all your contributions and questions. We'll be here again next week, next Tuesday at 11 o'clock. We'll be sending out an invitation very shortly. We want to thank you very much indeed for taking part and for contributing to today. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hope we've been able to give you a lot of good information. As Howard said, if you want additional information, additional assistance, some advice, please contact us independently. We're more than happy to do all we can to help you, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Guys, thank you very much. For those who want to be on the training webinar tomorrow, it's at 1 o'clock. Please follow the links and get yourself booked in. As always, as we leave this webinar, you should get a link for next week's webinar. We haven't written next week's webinar as yet, but if you want to join into it and have it already in your diary, feel free to do so. At least we say, hope you stay safe and well, and we'll see you tomorrow and next week.
Keep well, keep safe, guys. Thank you again. Bye now.